my name is Brenda Hertzmer. Welcome to FF103 Part Two of the Value of Strategic Foresight and Systems Thinking. So how do we know what's coming at us from the future? What do we pay attention to in order to be less overwhelmed and better prepared? Like all professions and areas of study, futurists have their own language. These ones here are key, and we'll unpack each of these for you. However, you'll find more information about these in the course materials as well. But understanding this taxonomy is really important in helping you figure out what to pay attention to. So we're going to talk a little bit about trends, about mega trends, about early signals, or sometimes they're called edge signals or weak signals. We'll talk about black swans as well as disruption and what we mean by that. We're going to begin by defining trends. A colleague of mine, Dr. Ken Ballmer, says that a trend is a manifestation of something that has unlocked or newly serviced an existing need, desire, want, or value. Others describe it as a pattern or general direction that we see from past events and their frequency. There are, most would agree that, or trend watchers would agree that it's not a trend unless there's some documented evidence of patterns or change in behaviors. But one of the things that is becoming clearer is that trends may not be as important when we're preparing for a future that hasn't been invented yet. And that's because the key word actually is that the trends result from past events. And so these are typically trends or things that we can document and prove. And when we're moving into a future where it's going to be difficult to predict, the past events can inform our decision making, but they may not be as valuable as intuition. And the other thing that we're seeing is that values may be important as a filter, as important a filter as trends. So in the past, trends have been much more important than we believe them to be now. Trends can help leaders determine consumer interests. It can help them identify potential supply problems. It can warn them of shifts in funder priorities and interests. It can alert them to emerging threats. It can help them identify opportunities. It can provide some insights about positioning your organization on emerging stakeholder agendas. It can help identify emerging promising practices. And it can also help you ensure that your programs and services are meaningful and relevant. It also can help you do a lot in terms of managing your products and services and events, because they will have and do have a life expectancy and often have natural decline. So it can definitely help you manage that. I think it's just important to remember that trends are based on what has already happened and can be documented. They cannot necessarily be projected into the future without due consideration. And so here is a list of what we're seeing as the top 10 technology trends that are shaping our future. And there's, in your course materials, you'll find an additional short paper that is explaining each of these. So that's something that you may want to dive into. We also want to talk about mega trends because, maybe we don't have the time and energy or the resources to look at a lot of different trends, but we can pay attention to mega trends. And those are a set of changes in our world that are enormous in their impact. So these are more global, they're sustained, and they're forces of development that impact business, the economy, society, cultures, and our personal lives as well. So these are some examples of some mega trends that we're seeing: artificial intelligence, big data, digitization and robotics, the global population growth, global warming and climate change, human longevity and the health care and that are associated with those challenges, Scarcity of vital resources like food and water. We're seeing a lot about food security these days, as well as urbanization. And I do like this cartoon here. In the future, we will continue to solve problems, even if that problem is, oh no, the robots outsmarted us. What do we do? This is a great manual. It's one of the few collections I have seen of mega trends that pertain to something other than businesses. So this came out of Great Britain, and this is also shown, it's a PDF. It's a great read to help you understanding, and these for many people are likely to be something that you will see as being more relevant right now to your communities. But this is also in your course materials. It's quite relevant. The next thing that we wanted to touch on are weak signals or edge cases, or sometimes what they're referred to as early signals. And you know, the first time I heard this from a futurist colleague of mine, I thought, you know, if it's a weak signal, why the heck should I pay attention to it? But these are important because they might seem to be simple, but they can suddenly grow a life of their own. And this is the perfect example that he gave me, was something that happened in 1991 that very few people were paying attention to. Because it was a changing world, but it was a weak signal. A lot of people didn't pay attention to it, and that was the internet. So there's an example of a weak signal that we should have paid attention to. And it also really reflects this definition of weak signals as usually being recognized by pioneers or special groups, not experts. And so that's why we need to pay attention to them. We also want to talk a little bit about black swan events. Black swan events are, you know, it's pretty much impossible to accurately predict a black swan event, but they can have catastrophic ramifications. So it's important to assume a black swan event is a possibility at any time. They could come at us, and we have to plan accordingly. And you know, quite often what has been provided as an example of a black swan event is what happened with 9/11. And also now a lot of people are suggesting that a black swan event is COVID. So most people would agree that they're black swan events, but it's a little bit controversial because there are many who did anticipate something happening with 9/11. There are many who anticipated a pandemic. So we had some early warnings, but it really wasn't mainstream. And so when it hit hard, and that's why it would be a black swan event. So we don't know what they are. We can't always predict them, but we sure as heck have to prepare for them. The last definition we wanted to share was disruption. And disruption is key to future focus leaders, because if we're going to facilitate transformative change, it's going to result in disruption. So we need to understand what that actually means. So disruption has three distinguishing features. It has to be affordable, has to be effective, and it has to be convenient. So if you want people, communities, businesses, if you want transformative change, those three factors have to be in play. So what we need to do in our community building work is to ensure that there's capacities for transformation in our communities. And part of that is adjusting public policy to create an environment for transformation.